For me, it's a great honor to speak here, and I would like to thank Ukrainian armed forces and all volunteers in Ukraine for this opportunity. I'm a human rights activist, and this is my vision of the world in which every person has dignity, rights and freedoms, and this means this influences in what way a person acts and takes decisions. For some reason, there is an opinion in the world that people who defend human rights don't have to use legitimate force for self-defense or to stop violation of human rights. That's why often at the international fora, when I'm asking and calling upon giving Ukraine modern weapons, I see that people are surprised. I can understand those who read in the newspapers that the Nobel Peace Laureate calls upon giving Ukraine combat tanks, but the values of modern civilization need to be defended. And at the moment, myself, as a person who has been dedicating more than 20 years of my life to protection of human rights and freedoms, have no instruments to stop the atrocities of Russians. My vision of the world has been formed under the influence of Ukrainian dissidents. I entered this community thanks to my teacher and the prisoner of Soviet camps, the writer and philosopher Yevgen Matviichuk. This is an unusual community of people who made enormous influence on my life and on what I'm doing now. No, they didn't quote the articles of the European Convention on Human Rights, or they didn't quote the norms of international treaties. No, they just gave an example as people who fought for freedom and human dignity and paid big price for that. People who lived the way they teach how to live, and they did what they talked about. And through this example, I decided to enter the legal university, Shevchenko University, the Department of Legal Studies. But then later I realized that when you live in Ukraine, if you have legal knowledge, it's not enough. It's in Switzerland. You may defend your rights and freedoms in the court. In Ukraine, to be a human rights activist means that except legal knowledge, you must have other knowledge. You must understand how to organize information campaigns. You must at least understand some basics of human psychology in order to talk to people who suffered gross crimes. You must understand the way international system operates in order to organize advocacy campaigns. You must find energy which you have to inject into this international system, which is not operational, for it to move in the right direction.
But the most important thing is not even the skill and knowledge, but the strength of spirit. And the next part of my lecture will be dedicated to the things related to the world outlook, because it is the strength of the Ukrainian spirit that helped us to withstand and helps us to keep on fighting against Russia's aggression. While after the beginning of the large-scale invasion, not just Russia, but even the civilized world were sure that Ukraine would fall. And this strength of the Ukrainian spirit determines our future victory, no matter when it's going to come. We were the first human rights organization which dispatched mobile groups to document war crimes in February and March 2014 in Crimea, in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. I deal with documenting, I have been dealing with documenting war crimes for 9 years already. Since the beginning of the large-scale invasion, we encountered an unprecedented number of war crimes. But I always say that we record not just the violation of the Hague or Geneva Conventions. We document human pain. Like shelling of evacuation corridors, the creation by Russia of a system of filtration camps, purposeful destruction of residential houses, churches, hospitals, killings, rapes, torture, and kidnapping of civilians on the occupied territories. As Russia uses war crimes as a method of waging this war, they're trying to break our resolve and to occupy Ukraine through inhuman suffering of civilians. That's why we document all those sufferings, to make sure that sooner or later Putin and the leadership of Russia, the top military command of the Russian Federation, and all the Russians who committed those crimes with their own hands be brought to justice and punished. During the first years of the war, I asked myself why they're so cruel. I worked with people who survived captivity, and they told me absolutely horrible things. They told me how they were beaten, how they were raped, how they were enclosed in wooden boxes, how they had their limbs cut off, how they were made to write with their own blood. One woman told me how she had one of her eyes taken out with a spoon. And this cruelty, which is a part of Russia's culture, is not accidental. I recall a well-known sociological experiment, which is quite a cruel one, when an animal, I think that was a dog, was prohibited from eating by electric current. Every time when the dog reached out to food, it was hit with electric current. And finally, it ended up in a situation when this poor animal decided to starve to death rather than fight for its survival. And that experiment was called a learned helplessness. And it appears to me that now Russians are carrying out this awful experiment over the whole Ukrainian nation. They want to cause so much pain to us so that we would stop resisting. But they've miscalculated. And if you take a look at any sociological poll, when Ukrainians are asked about values, the top of the list is the value of freedom. And this is the world outlook direction, which is the core of the Ukrainian spirit. And now, in this war against the Russian Federation, we're fighting for freedom in all meanings of this word. Because these values is something that determines our conduct not when things are easy, but when things are hard. And just like Ukrainian dissidents way back in the past, today we are paying the ultimate price for freedom. In this fight for freedom, we're standing on the shoulders not just of our predecessors of previous generations. This fight has been going on for centuries, but we also stand firm on our practical experience. And I'd like to share with you several stories, which are stories of real life for me and very important. The first one is the initiative of establishing Euromaidan SOS initiative, which we launched after the peaceful students' demonstration or rally on Maidan was beaten up. We worked 24/7 at that time. We united several thousands of people across Ukraine, and every day hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten up, arrested, tortured, or had criminal cases framed up for them. They were the people that we worked with. And at that point, we came out against a whole state machinery because the so-called titushkas cooperated with prosecutors cooperated with the courts, and then the president and the parliament were against the peaceful protest. They wanted to destroy it, even physically. And at that time, it was very easy to say, what can I do? The law doesn't work. And to get daunted and stop doing that. But since our volunteers and our lawyers very honestly fought for each individual, for every victim, finally we started working not at the legal but at the symbolic level, which creates new meanings of this fight. And every person on Maidan knew that there are no guarantees for our security at all. You can get arrested, you can be abducted, you can be killed, but there are people who will fight for you and will never abandon you. And this understanding made us strong to overcome fear. So, my first lesson of life lies in the conclusion that even when your efforts and your fight for freedom and human dignity appears to be senseless just because of the overwhelming force that you are fighting against, you have to carry on nevertheless, and the result will come sooner or later. Another real-life story is a story of the global action Save Oleksandra, which was launched by my team and myself when the well-known Ukrainian film director Oleksandra announced a hunger strike, as he was in the north of Russia, in Labetnange, in a camp, and he was totally incommunicado there, and he demanded that all the Ukrainian political captives in Russia be liberated. We wanted to make his voice heard, and for that purpose we united people in more than 35 countries of the world into a global action. And we started this action with simultaneous rallies, when in 35 countries of the world people took to the downtown squares with demands not to abstract figure of Putin, but to their national governments with the ideas of what they should do in order to help liberate Oleksandra and other captives. And finally, that was a success. And the fact that in 2019 Oleksandra and another 34 captives came back to Ukraine was the result of the effort of hundreds and hundreds of people across the world who supported that global action, global effort. But that action started with one individual, with Oleksandra, who, I will remind you, was imprisoned in far north of the Russian Federation and had no instruments at his disposal, just the strength of his word and his resolute position. So my conclusion is that even if for a fight we have nothing else but our voice and our strong stand, we have to use that, because your voice and your stand is a lot. And the third lesson of mine is about people. When the large-scale invasion started, we all witnessed how international organizations, even humanitarian ones, evacuated their staff to safer places, to more secure places, whereas ordinary people stayed on, and they started working and helped people to survive. They organized evacuation from the towns and villages which were encircled by Russians. They were getting people from under the rubble after shelling of residential houses. They helped others to survive in bomb shelters and supported each other in the conditions where there was no medical assistance, no electricity, no light, no nothing. I wouldn't wish on anybody to go through this experience, but those dramatic times made it possible for us to show our best, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, and to make complicated, difficult, but right decisions. Now, maybe as never before, we feel what it's like what it means to be human beings. And I know that many ordinary people are very humble, evaluating their contribution into our freedom and our democratic choice, because we are fighting against a formidable force. That is why I appeal to the image which was created on Maidan, when the Ukrainian artists created a placard, "I am a drop in the ocean." Well, that's right. Each and every one of us is a drop in the ocean. But that means that even though I cannot stop this war by my own efforts, but without my effort, nothing will change. And the third lesson which I drew from my experience means that when you cannot rely on legal instruments, you can always rely on people.
Because people have much bigger impact than they think, and the massive mobilization of people in different countries of the world can change the course of the international history much quicker than interference of the United Nations. And I would like to dwell upon a very important issue of what are we fighting for? Because this war began not in February 2022. This war began in February 2014, when Ukraine got a chance for quick democratic transformations. And in order to stop us on this way, Putin started this war, occupied Crimea and parts of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, because Putin is afraid not of NATO, he is afraid of the idea of liberty, freedom, which came closer to the borders of Russia. That's why a victory for Ukraine is not just to repel Russian troops from Ukrainian territory or to restore international order, to liberate Crimea and other temporarily occupied territories. The victory for Ukraine means to be successful in democratic transformations in our country. And we must remember this. It's complicated work even at peacetime, not to speak about the war and full-fledged aggression, and we all feel a very acute threat to our survival. But we don't have a luxury of postponing the democratic transformation of the country till the time of peace after the war. And so naturally, usually during the wartime, there is a temptation to become a mirror, to mirror the behavior of the opposing party, especially if this opposing party violates international rules and principles. That's why it's very important for us not to transform into Russia even when we win this war. There is no sense in doing this. And I would like to remind the audience, to our international partners, what we are fighting jointly in this war, which is not a war between two countries, but it's a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy, because Putin wants to persuade the whole world, not only Ukrainians, that democracy, human rights, and rule of law are fake values, because during the war they do not protect you. And we must answer something to this dimension of civilization conflict. And for this we should do two things. The first, we used to live in the illusion that we have an international system of security, but Ukraine is a vivid example of not operational system. When the Secretary General of the United Nations comes to Kyiv to meet with the President Zelensky, that day the Russian missile hits residential house, residential building, and kills our colleague, journalist Vera Kharich. So we see that in this world, our safety, our security, and respect to humans depend not on the international order, but on the military capabilities of the country in which a human being lives. That's why we must start radical reform of international system of peace and security. And this reform, the start of the reform should become an important symbolic step. We must exclude Russia from the UN Security Council for systematic violation of the statute of the UN. And the second point, the second thing which we should do together in order to demonstrate that rule of law, democracy, and human rights function, we must demonstrate justice. We must get justice, because there will not be sustainable peace in our region without justice, where Russia for decades has been using war in order to reach its geopolitical goals and military crimes as means to win this war. And now, when we are facing a huge number of military crimes, of war crimes, which cannot be digested even by the best legal system in the world, we need international support. We need international tribunal which would bring Putin, Lukashenko, and other war criminals to responsibility. then we'll be able to say, and we'll be very honest, yes, there was a period when nothing was functional. No legal mechanisms could stop Russian aggression. And even Nobel Peace Prize laureates or human rights activists asked different countries and called different countries upon giving us modern weapons. But we managed to bring Putin and other war criminals from Russia to responsibility. And in conclusion, I would like to appeal to the citizens of Ukraine. I have never been so proud to be Ukrainian before. And I would like to say that what our country will be at a time of the victory definitely depends on our fight today. When we speak about democratic transformation, it's not just taking good laws or setting up new institutions with good names. The values of the society are stronger. That's why we have to change the way of our thinking and bring into our world outlook more human rights perspective. Otherwise, we may repeat the situation when we fight against authoritarian regimes, reach certain success, prevail over authoritarian regimes, and then are not able to do our homework and to build such democratic institutions which would make our children safe and for them not to need to continue this struggle. And here we may speak about what Angus Madison said, who studied transformation of countries and who indicated that there are countries which try to modernize, but they hit with their heads against invisible rock, fall down, and then appear on the same trajectory. That's why we need to leap forward in order to get out of that turbulence in which Ukraine has been for decades. Otherwise, we are paying too much price for just a right to build a country which authorities are responsible, the courts are independent, and students who rally for their rights are not beaten. And this is our joint responsibility. I always remind myself this story since the times of Maidan, when after the shooting people, the relatives of the heavenly 100 spoke at the court litigations. Maybe you remember young boy Roman Hurik, nice-looking, with curly hair boy who was killed on Institutska Street. In the court, I listened to his mom. It was very hard to listen to his mom because she told us that after her son was killed, they brought his backpack to her, and she found paper wraps of sweets in his backpack because her boy was very well behaved and didn't throw away these wrappers just on the ground. And she said that as a mother, she didn't want her son to go to Maidan because, like any mom, she was she feared for his life and health. But then she remembered that 10 years before that, she stood herself on Orange Maidan, and she said that she didn't have any moral right to refuse him, not to allow him to go to Maidan. So I would like to say that I wish that our generation should be the last generation which is forced to stand for freedom, democracy, human rights and other values of the Western civilization, paying such a high price. We should take over this responsibility ourselves. We should not put this responsibility on our children. Thank you very much.